Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Tuesday, February 9th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Minnesota game is in 205 days. The game against Michigan in 291 days. Today is a day that a lot of Ohio State fans online look forward to every single year. It is the day that Alex Gleitman of Buckeye Scoop releases the first half of his post-signing day stories of the real inside stories of some of the Buckeyes' biggest recruits from that cycle. We had a post asking about it on our board last week from someone who called it, quote, seriously my favorite article of the year. Alex joins me now. Well, he's dropping the first half of that list, this year's list today at buckeyescoop.com. We're going to save that one just for our subscribers. We're going to let him instead share some of the more entertaining stories from previous years. Alex, let's start with a recruit from your home state of New Jersey, Luke Wypler. He was a true freshman offensive lineman for the Buckeyes last fall, and he was very nearly headed somewhere other than Columbus.
Yeah, I remember everyone thought he was going to Ohio State. And when it came time for his decision, I forget, I think it was in the middle of the summer or the spring, and it was decision day. And I was pretty close with Luke, having been not too far and checking out a bunch of their games and all that stuff. And he always said, yeah, I'll let you know where I'm going to go. We can do an interview before. So this was actually a day before he was supposed to announce, I think, a day or two. And so I get him on the phone. He's like, yeah, let's do the interview. I'm like, awesome. Get him on the phone, ready to do it. I said, so it's Ohio State, right? And I was about to go into my first question about Ohio State. And he goes, well, actually, it's Stanford. And I said, what? He said, yeah, I just, I feel like I just can't pass up that opportunity to go to Stanford and get my degree there for free and all that stuff. And I just remember, I did the interview. I surprisingly sent it to the Stanford 24/7 guy. I said, here's a gift, man. You can run this, whatever tomorrow. I spoke to Brian Doan, who was the East Coast guy, and he was actually talking to Augie Hoffman, who's now at Rutgers as an assistant coach, but was Luke Wypler's head coach on the other side of it. I was like, yeah, I just spoke to Augie. I can't believe it. I was like, well, I just spoke to Luke and did a whole interview. So I was like, we got the story, but crazy. And I remember I spoke to some people inside the Woody Hayes, and they were like, oh, crap. And they started scrambling. And I think it was Greg Schiano and Urban Meyer we're calling Augie Hoffman and asking Luke to hold off and let's figure this out. And I guess between the three parties, they kind of, they worked through some things. I think someone in Luke's camp was obviously, and listen, if it was my kid, I'd feel the same, like with the opportunity to go play at Stanford on a full ride. I mean, that's tough to pass up for anyone. So I think he kind of got wrapped up in that a little bit and wasn't thinking about all the components of this decision. This guy wants to play in the NFL, and you could go to Ohio State, get a degree, and do some pretty, especially with the alumni network that you have as an Ohio State football player. I mean, you could be pretty successful in life outside of football, and I think those things were kind of brought up to Luke again. And obviously, the development on the field that you're going to get at Ohio State is going to be far greater than what you're going to get at Stanford, and so I think push comes to shove when Luke really sat down with Augie Hoffman and his family. His best relationships were with Ohio State, and he felt confident that they could prepare him for whatever was after college, whether that's football, whether that's life in the real world, or football and then life in the real world. So that was a fun one, but it was kind of crazy how and me and everyone else assumed it was Ohio State, and it was like, nope, actually it was Stanford. So yeah, that was a fun one.
Yeah, that was July of 2018, because I have my own Luke Wypler commitment story. He committed while I was on vacation in California. I did not have a story pre-written for him, so I wrote it on my phone while waiting for my kid to finish playing in the playground behind left field at a San Francisco Giants game. There's like that big Coke bottle in left field at the San Francisco Giants stadium. He was going down a slide or something, and so I finished writing that while watching a San Francisco Giants St. Louis Cardinals game, if I remember correctly. Another offensive lineman with kind of an interesting story, Nick Petit-Frere. He was one of three tackles in that class of 2018 who the Buckeyes were after. Jackson Carman and Rasheed Walker were the other two. Carman, of course, ended up at Clemson. Walker at Penn State. And Petit-Frere just finished up a very dominating redshirt sophomore season for the Buckeyes. So what can you tell us about Nick Petit-Frere's recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people thought this one was going to go to like Alabama or Florida or someone in the South. I mean, he's from Tampa, the Berkeley Prep School. I don't think anyone really saw him at Ohio State. And I remember I was in a hotel in Boston on a work trip, not related to the recruiting gig. And I was getting ready to go out with some clients that evening, and I get a call from Brian Doan, just trading notes about, some East Coast guys and Ohio State and, just East Coast guys in general. And he goes, yeah, so I was talking to Greg, meaning Greg Schiano, because those two are pretty close. Obviously, Brian Doan being East Coast guy. He actually, I think, is a Rutgers alum. And Greg, having been at Rutgers for so long, leaned on him heavily, I'm sure, during his first stint at Rutgers. He's like, yeah, I was talking to Greg, and he said they're getting Nick Petit-Frere. And I said, what? I was like, are you sure? Like he was confident or what? And he was like, no, like he was 1,000% positive. And I was just in shock and awe. He's like, yeah, like apparently when Schiano was in Tampa Bay, his kids went to Berkeley Prep. And I believe in the year after he got fired or parted ways with the Bucks, whatever it is, and in between that and when he got to Ohio State, he spent some time as a volunteer coach for Berkeley Prep. And so he is a god there. And even you look at Rutgers now, they got a couple kids the last 2 years from Berkeley Prep, walk on from Berkeley. Like everyone, almost anyone at Berkeley Prep who Schiano offers, like now that I know this, they go to wherever he is. And so Brian told me, he's like, yeah, like Greg knows the kid, knows the family really well, has known them for a while. Like he will do whatever Greg says. Like he's like, if Greg leaves Ohio State, because at the time I think Schiano was rumored to maybe be going to New England with Bill Belichick's staff. And I think he did have that opportunity and ended up turning it down. But he said, if Greg goes to New England and tells the kid, go to Ohio State, he's still going to Ohio State. He's like, I'm telling you, like, go with this. Like he's going to Ohio State. And I still couldn't believe it. I ended up putting it out. Like I started putting it out, and then one thing led to another, and kind of out of nowhere, Nick Petit-Frere committed to Ohio State. But that was one where I just saw, I mean, Schiano was incredible in that one, and the relationships he had down there. And I just said, if there's ever a Berkeley Prep kid, I mean, unless it's Rutgers a little different than Ohio State, I'll say. And like, unless it's like a 5-star nationally recruited kid, but even then I might still pick Rutgers just because of how beloved Greg Schiano is at Berkeley Prep. So that was a fun one, but I don't think anyone saw Nick Petit-Frere coming to Ohio State, and I'm very happy. I think everyone else is very happy that he did end up coming.
Yeah, that is a good example of recruiting is all about relationships. That's one of those things that you probably hear us say a lot. You hear Mark and Bill and Alex and all those guys talk about how recruiting is all about relationships. Recruiting is really all about relationships. That is really a very big piece of the puzzle. Tyriq Smith was another guy who was kind of a high-profile back-and-forth recruitment, a little bit of a high-wire act between a couple schools before he ended up a Buckeye. What was the story with Tyriq Smith's recruitment?
Yeah, very simply, I mean, there's zero doubt in my mind Tyriq Smith was silently committed to Penn State. And for a while, and I think, at one point, James Franklin just did a better job recruiting him than Ohio State did. And it's funny because Jason Oweh actually ended up at Penn State and left early after this past season to go to the NFL draft. And Tyriq Smith ended up at Ohio State. But at one point, both of those guys were silently committed to the other schools. Oweh to Ohio State, Tyriq Smith to Penn State. And that's how I thought it was going to go for a while. And then at one point, it looked like Penn State was going to get both of them. Then maybe Ohio State was going to get both of them. That was a crazy interchangeable recruitment between those two guys. But Tyriq basically just slowly but surely, Larry Johnson chipped away and built a relationship with him. And Tyriq just basically decided he wanted to go to Ohio State. And I remember he went on a visit to Penn State. His parents, I think his grandparents flew in from like Nevada or something like that. And they brought the whole family because they were so excited. Tyreek's going to Penn State. Everyone meets the staff and has a great time. And I just heard Tyriq was miserable the whole time he was there. Not because he wasn't having a good time or Penn State did anything wrong, just because he didn't want to be there. He wanted to go to Ohio State, and he was he ultimately, I think, felt like he would be letting his parents and his family down by like kind of going back on what they were so excited about with Penn State. And I think, once all the cards were laid on the table, and his parents are awesome people. If you ever have a chance to meet them at a tailgate or whatever, they're tons of fun, super nice, down to earth. And I think they only want what's best for their kid or what their kid wants. And I think once Tyreek basically manned up and told him, I want to go to Ohio State, they were like, obviously more than fine with it. I think they thought, he wanted to go to Penn State and that was his decision and they were super excited about it. So that was one where it went back and forth a little bit for both guys, Jayson Oweh and Tyreek Smith. They both ended up at Jayson to Penn State and Tyreek at Ohio State. And, I think while Jayson Oweh is probably going to be a first round pick, at worst, an early second round pick this year, that obviously worked out for Penn State. I think Tyreek Smith's turned into a pretty nice player for Ohio State. And I'm really excited to see what he does his senior year on the field.
I remember Tyreek Smith's official visit to Ohio State. I was down on the field with the photographers doing these sort of parade of recruits coming down the tunnel and out, before the game. Tyreek Smith, I think, came out relatively late. And I was in the little photo bunker underneath South Stands, basically underneath where the band sits in South Stands, and just walked in there. And there's Tyreek Smith having a very in-depth conversation with Gene Smith, the athletic director of Ohio State. And they were talking for quite a while. It's like, all right, if the athletic director is taking the time to have a really in-depth conversation, first of all, this is a kid who's asking some really, probably some pointed questions about the program and the atmosphere and all that kind of stuff. But also, this is a rather high-profile person. Gene Smith is not talking to all 100 or however many people are visiting for any given game. That was a pretty good indication. Like, yep, that is a pretty high-priority recruit for Ohio State. Another defensive end from that same class who ended up a Buckeye was Giovante Jean-Baptiste. You were obviously New Jersey guy, as you mentioned. You had a front row seat for his recruitment. Why did the Buckeyes end up winning out there?
Yeah, so that was a late one. I was one where I think it was maybe the first year, maybe the second year, but it was definitely one of the first couple of years the early signing period existed. And Giovante did not sign in the early period. And that made him I would say it elevated his recruitment a little bit, because after signing day, you sit there and you say, okay, well, what are my needs and who else is still out there? And so it takes a guy who maybe is and I'm not saying this is the case with Giovante, but it takes a guy who's maybe a middle of the pack Power 5 recruit and makes him a top tier Power 5 recruit if there's a couple teams that need a defensive end like him, right? So I think Giovante, he did the smart thing. I forget where he was leaning before, but anyway, he waited and he kind of almost created, I don't want to say a bidding war, that's the wrong word, but it was a fierce competition for him. And at the time, he was a very raw kid. He was like an outside linebacker. People questioned, could he get big enough to play defensive end? I think everyone saw the high ceiling and the upside, but he was like a few years away from being what many people felt was going to be a contributor at that level. And it came down to Ohio State and Nebraska. And this thing was flip-flopping back and forth. He had an amazing visit to Ohio State. I remember, though, I think he stepped on the scale and was like 203 on his Ohio State official visit, or 208. I think that scared some people in the Woody a little bit, and they weren't so sure. I think they were a little wishy-washy on him. And then, but Giovante came back from that visit like, I'm going to Ohio State, like absolutely. But then he went to Nebraska, and he had a great visit there. And Nebraska's whole pitch was about like how he can have an early impact at Nebraska, and Ohio State, they're just going to recruit over him. And I just remember talking to Nunzio Campanile, who's also now a Rutgers assistant coach. He was the head coach at Bergen Catholic at the time. This was right before he left for Rutgers, actually. And I had a conversation with him, and he's like, look, I don't know what he's going to do. Like, he's like, I actually prefer he goes to Nebraska, not because I don't like Ohio State, but more so because I think he's going to take 3 years to get to where he needs to be to play at Ohio State. And by that time, they might recruit over him. They just get beasts every year, especially at defensive end. And my concern is just like, are they going to recruit over him? And is that going to discourage him while he's there? And at Nebraska, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that he can absolutely star there. And I think that makes perfect sense. And I think he was right. I mean, it did take JJB a couple years. I actually think it took him 1 year less than I expected to get to be a regular in the rotation a couple years back. And I thought last year he was pretty good. And I'm excited to see him take the next step up. But that one was close. It came down to the very last day on National Signing Day, he was flip-flopping back and forth, like even that night, I remember. And the morning of signing day, it was snowing. It was like a blizzard in New Jersey. And he couldn't get to school to fax in the letter, to send in the letter. And I think people were freaking out because at that point it was Ohio State. But the longer things went on without a letter, like he could have flip-flopped back to Nebraska. So that one was kind of fun and stressful for me trying to track that one just because of how much he flip-flopped in like the last 48 to 72 hours. And then the delay of him sending in the national letter of intent because of the snow. But I forget if he actually made it to school or he sent it from home, but finally they got it done. But that was, while you're sitting there waiting, like it's not coming in, it's not coming in, it's not coming in. Like, is he changing his mind? Like what's going on? So that one was kind of crazy.
Yeah, and one of the early games when he made a real impact might have been his first career start, actually, was ironically enough against Nunzio Campanile when he was the interim coach for Rutgers after Chris Ash got fired in 2019. I think they might have given Tyler Friday and Giovante Jean-Baptiste,
I think you're right,
New Jersey defensive ends, their first career starts that game, if I remember correctly. There was a defensive back in that 2017 class who seemed like he was destined to be a Buckeye. This is one that people will remember for I think it was his cute little nephew, rather famously, very, enthusiastically pointing to the Ohio State hat on the table, really wanted to be a Buckeye. He ended up staying on the West Coast and said that was Darnay Holmes. But that was a wild recruitment. Let people know about the story of Darnay Holmes and his recruitment.
Yeah, that was like one of those crazy Army Bowl things happened the week of Army Bowl. And that was like, if I remember correctly, that was like a split family situation where someone in the family wanted him at USC. Someone in the family wanted him at Ohio State, or he wanted to go to Ohio State. And kind of a compromise school was UCLA. I think they also had a pretty good relationship with the defensive backs coach and defensive coordinator there, might have been at the time. But I remember, I think coming into Army Bowl week, Darnay was going to Ohio State. Like, he was telling people that, he was telling other recruits that, and other commits that, and then things just got a little dicey down there. Kind of reminds me of like Donnie Corley when he went down, fully intending to be a Buckeye and then announced for Michigan State. And yeah, Darnay just, family pull down there really ultimately swayed him to UCLA at the end of the day. And look, I looking back, was that the best decision? I don't know. He entered the draft early last year. I think he's on the Giants now, if I remember correctly. I safe to say, I think he would have had a better career or would have had a better draft stock and been in better position had he went to Ohio State, certainly, and probably even USC, even though they haven't been all that great on the field. But that was one where there was just some wonky, funny business, family pull, family dispute down in San Antonio. And I think in a matter of like 3 days, it went from like Ohio State to USC to UCLA being the pick. And it was crazy.
All right, one final one from back in 2017. A running back by the name of Trey Sermon. You may know him as the guy who is the current single game rushing record holder for Ohio State. But his road to Columbus took a little bit of a detour through Norman, Oklahoma first.
Yeah, that one early looked like Ohio State was going to come out on top. And I think Nevada actually, we weren't at the same site at the time, but I think he actually put the equal sign on Trey Sermon, if I remember correctly. And he had that one. There was no doubt that Trey Sermon wanted to go to Ohio State. Ohio State wanted Trey Sermon. And then I think it was his junior year. It must have been his junior year of high school. He had an injury. I think a knee injury. Might have been an ACL, something like that. Pretty bad knee injury. And not that Ohio State wouldn't take a kid off a knee injury, but they didn't have to take him in that. It's not like he got injured his senior year when he was already committed. And then you're kind of in that position. He wasn't committed yet, even though it was kind of headed that way. And I don't think everyone was fully sold on him after that injury. Not that like they thought it was going to be career altering, career ending, or anything along those lines, but I think there was just some hesitations and reservations. And then of course there was a guy by the name of J.K. Dobbins was in that class, right?
Yes, that was 2007. Yeah. That was a Dobbins class. Yep.
Yeah, not a bad running back. Decided to just commit to Ohio State out of nowhere. without ever visiting the school, which wasn't so weird in the 2021 recruiting class, but back then in 2017, it was super weird and random and odd, but they felt really good about J.K. Dobbins, even though a lot of people questioned that at the time. Look who's right now. And, they just decided to go a different way. They just decided to move on past Trey Sermon and not pursue making him a second back in the class or anything along those lines. And Trey found a great home in Oklahoma where he was contributing pretty solidly until, he had another injury, I guess his junior year of college for the Sooners. And funny how things, kind of come full circle. I mean, when you recruit someone, it's not just 4 or 5 months. It's like, we were talking Mecca Buka, like for him, like that's a 2-year process, right? Like that's like a 2-year process. So like, when everyone was like, oh, Oklahoma's going to steal him. Like we kept saying, like Mark and I and Bill kept saying they've been recruiting him and building this relationship for 2 years. And that was the same with Trey Sermon, probably maybe a little less than that, a year and a half. But that paid off later on when Trey Sermon's looking to be a graduate transfer. Of course, he's looking at, okay, who needs a running back? Where can I play and contribute immediately? But when you look at a lot of the coaches on the staff and guys like Mark Pantoni, who had been there, who do need a running back and now are reaching out to him, there's already that built-in comfort and relationships, and he knows what to expect if he does choose Ohio State. So while they didn't get him back at the time, their efforts paid off. What is it? I guess 4 years later, something like that.
Yeah, that is quite a recruiting class. You ended up, when all is said and done, with the guy who has the single game rushing record in Trey Sermon and the single season rushing record in J.K. Dobbins, both running backs in the class of 2017. They never played together. They were in the same recruiting class, never played together, but both have those kind of significant records in the Ohio State record book. That is, we always talk about recruiting being a crazy business. That is one of those recruiting is a crazy business things. Now, Alex, you are dropping the stories behind the recruitments on the offensive side of the ball for the Ohio State class of 2021 today. So that will include not only the guys Ohio State signed, but also some of the near misses. Which story from this year's class do you think is going to get the most reaction?
It's a tough one. There's a lot of good ones in there. I haven't even finished writing the defense yet, but writing the offense, I'll have to say for this piece coming out today, I'm going to go with J.C. Latham. Obviously, offensive lineman committed, signed with Alabama. I think 24/7 has him in like the top 5, maybe the top 2 or 3. He's that good of a tackle prospect, and Ohio State sure could have used him this year. And at one point, it looked like they were going to get him, but they didn't. And without giving away too much, I think fans will really enjoy hearing the story and how that one unfolded, because I was literally getting it like play by play as it was happening. And I was putting it on the site like as much as I could at the time, but I think I was able to share a little bit more in this piece. Probably some I even have to hold back from this piece a little bit, just because it gets a little dicey sometimes and you can't always tell everything. But I think I gave you, given all of our subscribers as good of a taste of that one as you could get. And it should be pretty clear as to what happened in that one when you're all done reading it. So definitely, honestly, like, not forget my name on the byline. I would honestly say that just if I was as a fan, like wanting to know what happened in that recruitment is probably worth $13 or whatever we charge for a month. So definitely check it out. And if you're a subscriber, get on there and check it out. I'll have it up this afternoon.
Yeah, if you do want to read that today, and if you are still listening 20 minutes into this podcast, I'm pretty sure that you are the type of person who's interested in these stories behind recruiting stories. So then make today the day you sign up at BuckeyeScoop.com. I mean, that is just one of the great stories we have that is exclusively going to be in our members section. Next week, the defense will be exclusively in our members section. Bill Green just posted not only the stories some of the stories he heard from this year's class, also an early look at who he expects to be in the Buckeyes 2022 recruiting class as well. That there is just a ton of great content at BuckeyeScoop.com. And this is the off season. Like, I mean, this is supposed to be the slow time of year. Oh, there's nothing going on. Like, there is an incredible amount of content. And I have gone back and reread all of Alex's. Alex shared all of his old, from 2016 to 2020, all of his old editions of this column as well. And it is fascinating reading. Not only the guys who came to Ohio State and knowing how that all turned out, but the guys who went somewhere else and knowing how those recruitments turned out. Jackson Carman, for example, that's an interesting one. I mean, there's a million interesting ones going back to 2016. Lots of fascinating names. If you are someone who follows recruiting, like, man, oh man, this is really, really going to be interesting. I will do you a favor. I will link the all of those old ones in the post for today's podcast on BuckeyeScoop.com. So just find this show on the front page of BuckeyeScoop.com. You will have a link right in there to find all of Alex's old ones, and then he will have the new one up today as well. I just need to be a member at BuckeyeScoop.com to read all of that great stuff. So consider becoming a member today. As Alex said, it's $12.99 a month. Like, it's the price of a crappy chain store pizza. You will enjoy reading just Alex's stuff a lot longer than you will enjoy that crappy chain store pizza. So go to BuckeyeScoop.com and sign up there for that. Also, make sure you check out all of our great podcasts, including Alex's Around the Oval podcast. You can find those on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Spreaker. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. You can subscribe right there. Also, leave us a 5-star rating and review. And I mean it, Alex's podcast is really one of my favorites. It is always a great conversation, lots of interesting guests, so always worth your time. So thank you guys all for listening. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.